last thing we did in the Daas Tevunos was we read Rav Friedlander's footnote 214 on page page 96 of Rav Friedlander's print of the Daas Tevunos. We read Rav Friedlander's footnote 214, which he calls a sikum, a summary of the last paragraphs about how Ra came into being, at what stage it came into being, the phases, the two phases, and the stages in each phase. We talked about the world was created perfectly imperfect with a little vacuum in it, and in that vacuum, Adam Mauritian had the ability to push the 99% of perfection into that 1% of imperfection. Again, we're just making up numbers. And then that would have been the tikkun ha'olam. The world was 99% perfect and a vacuum. So it was perfectly imperfect. And in that vacuum, Adam Mauritian could have pushed the 99% of good into it, and the world would have been 100% good, which means tikkun ha'olam. Adam Mauritian had that ability. Unfortunately, he failed. And what happened was that vacuum area now became filled with Ra, which was in the Bria. And there was in the Bria, we talked about it, was mixed, good and bad, or in Choshech. God separated it out. Adam Mauritian put that Ra now into the Tov. And as each person does, Lo Aleinu, something that he shouldn't be doing, the Ra expands into the territory of Tov, and you have Ra 10%, you have Ra 20%, and that increases Ra and decreases Tov in the world. And with that, there's an increase of Ra and a decrease in the Tov and the hashpa'ah of Tov that can come to the world. The less Tov in the world, the more we decrease the hashpa'as hatov in the world, even in the sense of the physical world. It's not just a spiritual issue. We mentioned several times the Gemara, for example, in Sot, at the end of Sot, the Gemara says, from the time of the Churban Beis HaMikdash, nitul tam peiros. Fruits do not taste the same way. Although the Churban Beis HaMikdash was burning down of a physical building, and the spirituality that was inside the building was no longer there, it affected the taste of fruits. Dates were not as sweet. Figs were not as sweet. Pomegranates did not have the full size and the full taste. The physical world suffered in beauty, in taste. It suffered because of the Churban Beis HaMikdash. But the Rebbeinu Shalom made a rule, and that's what Friedlander was talking about. He made a rule. Ra is not going to completely take over the world to the point of 100%, so that the world eventually has to be destroyed. The whole world will be destroyed. The world will implode. God put a border and said, this is how far you can go. Beyond that, I will step in and stop the Ra from expanding. And that's basically where we were up to in the footnote. We did not learn the Ramchal in the text. What we did was we learned the footnote 214 as a summary of the Ramchal, and then we said we'll come back with the understanding we got from the footnote, the summary footnote. We'll come back and read the Ramchal inside so that we would have an understanding of what the Ramchal is saying. So now we're going to go to page 95, Tzaddik K, in the Rav Friedlander print, and paragraph 118, Kuf Yud Ches, in those who are using the paragraph form. So Rav Friedlander writes, right before Kuf Yud Ches, he writes his caption. Metchila nivra ha'olam bilti sholem. Initially, the world was created not 100% perfect. It was created perfectly imperfect. Sheyacholu bo kilkale hara, so that in that area that is not yet perfect, based upon man's decision-making process, if he makes the wrong decisions, in that vacuum can come into the kilkuli hara, evil, disease, bacteria, viruses, war, famine, lo aleinu. Man can bring this upon himself through this area that's left open. Man can perfect that area, or man can cause that area to be imperfect. And all of this, as Rav Friedlander said at the end of footnote 14, all this was done to make Bechira possible. This area where man is going to choose what will we do with this open area? Will I expand the good into it, or will I put bad into it? This is the area where man is making a decision what he wants to do with the world. And because he's making a decision with what he wants to do with the world, now he can be rewarded or chas v'shalom otherwise. That's your area of Bechira. So Rav Friedlander on page 95 says in the caption, Achar kach, after that, in other words, after HaKadosh Baruch Hu created this vacuum area in which man is going to either expand the good or expand the ra, God then also made a rule, a chidush, something new, that this vacuum area, if man inserts evil into it, there's only so much evil he can insert into it. Man cannot create enough evil in there so that the evil completely overtakes the good. There's no good left in the world, and the world has to be destroyed. God will not allow that to happen. He will cut off the ra at some point and say, Ad kan. Kuf Yud Ches, Amar HaSeichel. The Seichel says to the Neshama, Kvar Manu Shahara Hazeh Shenivra. We already talked about the fact that this ra that was created, again, not in phase 1 of creation, but in phase 2. Lo nivra ela begavul sherotzabo hachefetz elyo. It was only created within the boundaries that the Ribono Shel Olam would allow it to function in. V'omnam, however, af al pi shechidish ha'odem baruch hu habitul avayot, even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu chidesh, he created a new thing. We're always talking, we're talking about God created. These are new things that God creates, because before he created these things, none of this existed. The only thing that existed before creation was God himself. Nothing else existed. The world was created, something from nothing. Yesh me'ayin, we talked about that in the Bereshis Shir so many times. According to Nachmanides, the Ramban, Hiyuli, earth, Hiyuli, our universe, Hiyuli, heaven, something from nothing. Before the Hiyulis are created, there's nothing here but God. So every time we talk about creation, we're talking about a chiddush, something new is happening. Even though HaKadosh Baruch Hu put in a new system that it is possible for things that are created to be nullified, to die, which is what we talked about again yesterday in Nachmanides, when the pasuk says, Vayomer Elokim Yihi Or, it means God willed something into creation. The Vayomers in the 6 days of creation, each Vayomer means God willed something into existence. Vayam Elokim Kitov, and God saw it was good. That means, and God willed it to continue to exist. Again, there's no default saying that because anything exists, it will exist the next second. Everything is machadish b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis. Everything requires an act of chesed every second that it keeps on going. There is no default. It was like this a second ago. It will be like this the next second. This is constant machadish b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereishis. There's an act of chesed of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We mentioned the Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara says on the pasuk in Tehillim, Kol haneshama talolka, every soul should praise God. The Gemara says, Al kol neshima uneshima talka. For every breath a person takes, he should praise God, because every breath is a new gift of God. There is no default. It was a second ago, it will be the next second. It is not true. Every second is a chesed min hashamayim. And the Rabbanu Shalom also created in the system a new rule called bittul havayot, that something that is created can be nullified. There is no such thing as created, and therefore it's permanent. Vayomer Elokim, God willed something into existence. Vayam Elokim kitov, and God willed it to continue to exist. And when God's will that something continue to exist stops, it ruins, and it's nullified, and it dies. So God created in this system the bittul havayot, the nullification of things that were created. Lo chitchu el havayos tishleus. In this system, that which can be nullified and die or get ruined are things that are imperfect. Things that are imperfect and stay in a state of imperfection, there's a rule in the world that these things die, ruin, and come to an end. So as we learned earlier in the Sefer, no matter what the neshama does for the guf, no matter how much great work the neshama does on the guf, with a few rare exceptions, Eliyahu, few rare exceptions, man dies. Because no matter how much good work the guf does, the neshama does in converting the guf into a spiritual existence, there's still Eitz Hadas Tov Ra in that guf that has to go into the kever, and it has to decompose so that a new guf can come into being that doesn't have the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra infection in it, and that occurs at Tchias HaMesim. So the Rabbanu Shalom created in the system that those things that are imperfect, the world was created perfectly imperfect. Man put into the vacuum area imperfection, Ra, and in the world there's a part of the system is that which remains imperfect is going to eventually ruin, come to an end, and die. Ach lahavoyas hashleimus. However, to those creations, to that part of existence that does attain a status of perfection, lo yeh bittul. Then the rule is there's no nullification, there's no end, it's eternal. Therefore, for example, at Tchias HaMesim, where there is now a guf, and remember the Ramchal explained to us, after the guf goes through its transitional phases after Tchias HaMesim, in that final transitional phase, we can't even call it a guf. We don't even know what to call it at that point. But there is something called guf, just to use that word. And at that point in time, the neshama comes in, the neshama is in this guf. That is a havaya shlema. That is a perfect creation now, to the extent that there is a perfection in, quote unquote, the human being. That neshama in that guf, post post the transformations that occur after Tchias HaMesim, that perfect guf neshama, then there's no ruination, because ruination is a rule in the imperfect part of the bria. The perfect part of the bria, when it gets to that status, there's no such thing as ruination. That's what we call the netzach netzachim, the eternal existence. Elokiyuma miyunitzchi. Then the existence becomes forever and permanent. Vitiri, and you should see and understand. Al kain ata, therefore now, as the world exists now, yesh bittul havayot ha'olam, there is nullification, there is ending, there is death to things that exist in the world. Ula asid lavo lo ye'od. But in the future, post the Tchias HaMesim, we don't even talk about such things as a bittul, a nullification, death, because at that point, it's not just that after Tchias HaMesim we live forever. Why do you live forever after Tchias HaMesim? Whatever forever means. But why? The reason there's a concept of forever after Tchias HaMesim is because in the system the Ribono Shel Olam created this new rule called imperfections have to come to an end. And you think about it a little, it's logical. It's imperfect. It can't sustain itself forever because the imperfection is inside, internally in this thing. This imperfection is causing imperfection, and imperfections cannot exist eternally. But once something perfects itself as a guf, post the transformations of Tchias HaMesim, we don't talk about bittul. We don't talk about death any longer. Not because there's no death later after Tchias HaMesim, is because the rule of death is a rule of the imperfection, which came from the Eitz Daas Torah, caused the death and the nullification. Once there's a perfection, imperfection is no nullification, and therefore in the future, post the transformations at Tchias HaMesim, there is no longer this issue of nullification and death. And therefore, right now, because creation is not perfect, therefore the decree remains that there is nullification, there is ending, and there is death. However, in the future, there will be, so to speak, a new heaven and a new earth. The Ramchal is using words that come from the Navi. There'll be new heavens, new earth. Shetia briyasam shalema. That new heaven and that new earth will be a perfect, not a perfectly imperfect creation. That will be now the perfectly perfect creation from our vantage point. Of course, nothing ever attains God's perfection. Therefore, we don't even talk about nullification, death, or ending, because when there is perfection, perfection can exist. Imperfection cannot go on forever. V'nimtza, the Ramchal says, Shehahashpah harishona, shehimtzia metzius hateva hakloli, ubitul sidura shehimtzi kukuli hateva. Therefore, that very first hashpah that came from Hashem, that very first influence that begins creation, that created what we call the metzius hateva hakloli, the general rules of the Teva, all the things we spoke about earlier. If you want to talk about the Yuli, just the general rules of Teva without any detailed specificity, and as well as the nullification of the normal world order that occurs from the Kilkuli Teva, from when the Teva is not functioning properly. Instead of having normal weather conditions, we get tsunamis, or we get floods, we get volcanoes, or diseases, or viruses. That very first hashba'ah was not the perfect hashba'ah to create perfect things, because again, if you create perfect things, then it's already perfect. There's no bechira, there are no choices to make. I am perfect. I'm always going to do the right thing as a robot. I will never do anything wrong. I have no freedom of choice. And then I can't get real schar because I'm a robot. So that first hashbah creates things that are not sholem, that are not perfect. They're perfectly imperfect. Unlike the new heavens and the new earth that are coming, that they will be perfect creations, and there'll be no kilkule teva. There will be no nullification, as we explained. This is the perfectly imperfect world that God created, with the possibility of evil, bad things happening, for us to make our decisions. And the influence that brought about the creations, not just human beings, all of creation, of the quote-unquote physical, natural, quote-unquote world, Merkavim min atov v'hara. There's a mixture, a blend in there of good and bad, and we're going to decide whether we want to latch on to the good and allow the good to overtake the bad, or latch on to the bad and let the bad overtake the good until God steps in and says, I'm not going to let this continue because otherwise the world will be destroyed. And that's really what God did at the Mabul. We think of the Mabul as God destroyed the world. There's a way to look at the Mabul as God saved the world. God said, if I allow mankind to continue on the path it's continuing right now, the whole world will implode. There'll be nothing left. And I'm going to therefore step in at this critical moment where the whole world's perverted, the whole world's immoral, everyone's stealing from each other, all the Averis of the Dor HaMabul. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, if I just step back and do nothing and allow this to continue, society will implode, people will eventually kill each other, the whole world will come to an end. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, stop. I'm going to stop this, what's going on. I'm going to erase everything. All of mankind is going to be destroyed. We're going to build a teva. Noah, his wife, his children, and their wives are going on to the teva. And on the teva, as we explained in the Maharal, we're going to create a new world inside that teva. And when Noah, his wife, and his children, and their wives get off the teva with the animals, there'll be a new world to start again. So while the Mabul destroyed the world, it also saved the world, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu was stepping in and saying, enough, we're stopping, and we're going to erase what's here, and we're going to start a new world. Rebbeinu Shalom actually saved the world. And that's the Gavul. HaKadosh Baruch Hu steps in and says, Ad Kan, this is as far as I'm going to allow Ra to go into the world. This is as far as I'm going to allow humanity to trample on good and push the Ra in territory of good, and this is as far as it's going to go. And now I'm going to just wipe it out and start again from the tzaddik. Hine hi hashpah shemavdelas harois levadam shelo yivotlu hanimtzois elo mugbolim yu b'kar k'zeirosa shel mokom utluyim b'mama shelo liskabel levatlas hanimtzois Ki'im lehimotze ba'osa ashir utchum shetzorech letchunas hanimtzois ha'ela ulehizgaber bisman acha shemitztarech b'tagboris yoseh gadol ubisman acha lehimoi hakol yofa be'ito kasher goza hachafetz ha'elyon. At certain, the Rebbeinu Shalom, as we mentioned, last time we learned the Daas Tevunos, the Rebbeinu Shalom separated out the Ra from the Tov so that we can make decisions and latch on to one. Actually, we're almost, in a certain way, separating out the Ra from the Tov as we make our decisions. And sometimes the Ra becomes more powerful in the world. Sometimes the Tov becomes more powerful in the world. And all this is the up and downs of the world. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously is running the world. And it's all occurring in a way where HaKadosh Baruch Hu is controlling exactly how much Ra he will allow into the world, sometimes more, sometimes less. Kime'ata yesh b'nimtzois min ha'chesronos. I'm on page 96 now. Kime'ata, because now yesh b'nimtzois min ha'chesronos v'kulam v'adai ach einum kol kach she'yivatlum mahavai. Obviously, there's a lot of imperfections in the world. There's a lot of evil in the world. But there is not enough in the world. God will not allow that to happen, that enough evil will occur in the world to destroy all of creation. But omnam hein bashir shaso sof yiskabru ad sheyevatlum he called hova nifset. However, even the evil, no matter how powerful it gets, and it looks like it's taking over the world, for omnam hein bashir shaso sof yiskabru ad sheyevatlum, the evil itself is going to come to an end. This whole idea of evil, viruses, disease, war, famine, suffering, is also something that came into the world in phase 2, as we call it, of creation. And this evil is also something created. It's an imperfection in the Bria. And the same way that in the Bria that's imperfect, everything has to come to an end, get nullified, and die, Ra also is going to get nullified and die and come to its end, b'mheira v'yameinu. No matter how powerful the Ra gets, ad she'yavatlum, until God nullifies evil, ki kol ho v'nifsad, anything that came into existence, evil also came into existence, is a nifsad. It's going to come to an end, and it will be nifsad. It will come to an end. V'nimtza mitziyusa mishur b'shur medukduk ma'od, and therefore we're talking about shir mishur, the exact precision God running the world. Kasher yoda chochmel yoina. This is based upon God's chochmel yoina, his intellect, which is beyond anything we can imagine. We spoke about this in different areas. Yesterday we spoke in the Bereishis Shir, Vayi Erev Vayi Voke Yom Echad. When was light created? We read the Ramban, we read Nachmanides. When did God create light? You can't have a concept of darkness. There's nothing in the world. There's nothing here except for God. And God creates the Hiyuli of earth, and God creates the Yuli of heaven. And he says to the Yuli of earth, I want light to come out of you. And light comes out. When did that light come out? So if you learn the pasuk the way the halacha learns the pasuk, there was night, there was day, and that became because of the yom problem that we talked about yesterday, let's read it this way. There was night, there was morning, and it was a 24-hour day. Halacha tells us that from this pasuk we learn out that the Jewish day begins at night. We start Shabbos Friday night till Motzei Shabbos. We don't start Shabbos morning till Sunday morning, chas v'sholom. The halachic day, with two exceptions, starts at night. How do I know that? Vayi Erev, it's night. Vayi Voker, it's morning. Yom Echad, that's a day. Night begins the day and then flows into the next morning. When did God create light? In order to say Vayi Erev, that the night comes before the morning, there is no such thing as night. Night is only the result of the light setting. When the light sets, we then have night. When did God create light? So, Rabbeinu Yehuda Halevi Nekuzari, the Ramban quoted him, but not by name, suggested that God, for a millisecond, put light into the west of the sky, and then immediately made that light set. And now because you had light and you don't have light, now there's such a thing called darkness. Now Vayi Erev, and it was night, because that light that was there for a millisecond went away, and now you have something called dark. So there was dark, it was night, and then the next day next morning, the light came back up, and you have a day. The Ramban said, I reject that pshat. It can't be, because when we talk about the 6 days of creation, we're talking about God's precision 6 days. We don't have 6 days plus a millisecond in creation. We have 6 precise days of 24 hours a day, 60 minutes an hour, 60 seconds a minute. It's precision. God started a day, and the day lasted 24 exact hours, not 24 hours and a millisecond. So the idea that God put up light for a second, a millisecond, and then set, and now Vayi Erev, there's darkness, because you can only talk about darkness after there's light. So there was darkness because there was light for a millisecond. And then there was morning. And that's a day. That's not a day. That's a day plus a millisecond. And the Ramban vociferously rejects this idea that God's day of 24 hours, a little millisecond thrown in there. And the Ramban offered a different shot to Vayi Erev Vayi Voki Yom Echad. The point we're making here is we're talking about precision. God's created the world with precision. It continues to exist with precision. And the Ra is guided by the Ribono Shel Olam. Guided meaning man makes decisions, but the Ribono Shel Olam is watching this. And he has a precision calculation as to how far this Ra can go, and then he shuts it down. And sometimes we don't like the way he shuts it down. Mabul would be an example. But he shuts it down because he's not going to allow the world to be destroyed because of man's choices. Everything is with precision. We gave another example last week in the Chumash here in Pashas Vayigash. Yosef said to his brothers when he revealed that he's Yosef, and he said, go home and bring Papa Yaakov down to Mitzrayim. Yosef said to his brothers, one of the things he said, Al tirgizu baderech. And what does that mean? So Rashi says, first pshat, don't fight on the way home. You sold me, and now don't fight. Reuven will blame Yehuda, Yehuda will blame Reuven, Yisachar will blame Shimon, and Shimon will blame Dan. And there's going to be a fight between everybody going home. You're the one that sold Yosef. You're the one that sold Yosef. The whole story is your fault. Leave it alone. God sent me here. Kim Shlachani, and I'm here. This was God's will. Go home and bring Papa Yaakov. Don't fight. The other pshat that Rashi brings down is Al tirgizu b'derech shlo tafsiut psiagasa v'tikanes b'cham le'ir. I want you to please go home at a normal pace. Don't go too fast. Al tafsiut psiagasa. Don't run, and don't travel at night. A normal travel. Normal speed during the day, you camp at night and start the next day. That's what Yosef said, according to the second shot of Rashi from the Medrash. So we read the Kotzker Rebbe. The Kotzker Rebbe said, listen, everything is marked with precision in heaven. And in this particular case, we know it's marked with precision because Yaakov was absent from Yitzchak and Rivka for 36 years. 14 years he spent in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver, and 20 years he spent in the house of Laban, and 2 years traveling back to Yitzchak. Rivka had already died by the time he was on his way back. So you have 14 Shem and Aver, 20 in Laban is 34, 2 years traveling back to Eretz Yisrael, that's 36. Yaakov did not perform the mitzvah of Kibbut Avim for 36 years. The first 14 years at Shem Ve'eva, the Gemara Megillah Daf Yud Zayin says that Yaakov was not punished for those 14 years. But for the 22 years, he was punished. For those 22 years that Yaakov didn't do Kibbut Avim, Yosef was absent from Yaakov's home, and he didn't do Kibbut Avim, and Yaakov suffered for that. 22 years. Yosef was sold when he was 17. Yaakov meets him again in Mitzrayim when Yosef is 39. That's the 22 years. So this is going to be exact. This is precision etch marked in heaven. 22 exact years. It may be 21 years, 364 days and 2 hours, 36 minutes and 2 seconds. I don't know exactly what it was, but it may have been exact 22 years. I don't know, but it was somewhere either exact 22 years or around 22 years. And Yosef, Yaakov is not going to hear those words. Yosef is still alive. He's not going to hear it for exactly 22 years or 21 years, 364 days, 60 minutes, 58 minutes and 32 seconds. It's going to be exact. So therefore, the Kotzker Rebbe said that Yosef is telling his brothers, don't rush home. Walk the normal human pace. Do the normal human hishtatus, because if you're going to go faster, something's going to happen on the road. Someone will break a leg, chas v'shalom, but the Ribono Shel Olam is going to hold you up. You're not getting back to Papa Yaakov to tell him I'm alive until the time decreed in heaven. And the time decreed in heaven on the normal means you use your normal effort. Go at a normal speed, rest at night, and Yaakov, Papa, is going to find out I'm alive at the exact moment. And we gave another example, Shaul. Shaul lost his father's donkeys. He wants to find his father's donkeys, and he's with his assistant, and they decide they're going to go look for Shmuel Hanavi, and Shmuel's going to tell them where the donkeys are. They start going towards the area where Shmuel Hanavi lives. They can't find him, and they run into some young girls, and they ask the girls, "Where is Shmuel?" And the girls give him a very long-winded answer. Well, he's in the middle of bringing karbonos with a whole group of people, and no one's going to eat from the karbonos till he eats from the karbonos, and he's not eating from the karbonos till he makes a bracha. Oh yeah, make a right and make a left. What's all those extra words for? Why don't they just say go make a right and make a left? One of the Gemara's answers in Brachas and Ches Amid Beis is that Shaul, when he meets Shmuel, there's going to be a transition in Jewish leadership. Shmuel Hanavi was the leader of the Jewish people. When Shmuel meets up with Shaul, Shaul is going to be told that he's the king of the Jewish people. So there's going to be a transition from Shmuel to Shaul the moment they meet. What moment will they meet? That's etched in heaven from the time the world was created. Shmuel will be the leader of the Jewish people for X amount of years and X amount of days and X amount of hours and X amount of seconds. And Shaul will be king for X amount of years and X amount of days and X amount of minutes and X amount of seconds. So Shaul was really trying to find Shmuel. He wanted to find his father's donkeys. So he's going very quickly to find Shmuel Hanavi, but he's going a little too quickly. And if he's not stopped, what's going to happen is he's going to get to Shmuel a couple of seconds too early. And if he gets there, then Shmuel's reign will end a couple of seconds too early. Shaul will become king a couple of seconds too early. And that can't happen because those seconds count with precision in heaven. So what happens? Shaul asks these girls, how do I get to Shmuel? And therefore, they start talking about the korban and the bracha and who's eating first. And by this, they delay Shaul a couple of seconds. Now Shaul, when he goes to meet Shmuel, he meets Shmuel at the exact millisecond decreed in heaven for the two of them to meet, by which the power over the Jewish people transfers to Shmuel, to Shaul. That's the precision of heaven. So there you have the precision in heaven in terms of time. Who becomes king, what second, what millisecond. We have the precision of Yaakov and Yosef. When will Yaakov find out that Yosef is alive? Etched to a millisecond in heaven. And there's a precision by which the Ribono Shalom is watching over the world, how much Ra will allow to happen in this world, all of which is happening through man's choice, man's Bechira. The world was created for this purpose of Bechira, so that through Bechira we can gain reward. Otherwise, we're robots. Robots don't get real rewards. So we're created with Bechira. HaKadosh Baruch Hu can give schar, and the purpose of the world is lahativ, so that HaKadosh Baruch Hu can give us schar. Therefore, the Ribono Shalom, quote unquote, is hesitant to interfere in the good and the bad that's happening in the world, because this is man's Bechira. If he interferes in that equation, he's interfering in man's Bechira. And that's something that the Ribono Shalom, quote unquote, hesitates in doing. And maybe we'll give an example of that in the Thursday shir. Therefore, the Ribono Shalom hesitates in interfering in that area, but when he has to, and the Ra is going too far to the point where it can completely nullify and destroy the world, the Ribono Shalom steps in and says, Ad kan, no more, that's it. All Yidden need Yeshua should have Yeshuas, all Yidden need Nechamas should have Nechamas, all Yidden need Refuah should have Refuahs, all Yidden need Brachas, Yeshuas, they should have all the Brachas, Yeshuas from the Hashpos, HaToiv of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu can send Brachas, Yeshuas, Nechamas, and Refuahs how he wants, when he wants, if he's using a shliach, through which shliach he wants. When we understand this, internalize this, and live this, We're doing what the Ramchal calls the Gilui HaYichud for ourselves. We donate that Gilui HaYichud to the Klal Yisrael, so that Klal Yisrael can come to that critical mass of Gilui HaYichud, where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with sending Mashiach Tzidkenu, can finish that Gilui HaYichud, bring the Beis HaMikdash, and we can build the Beis HaMikdash, and bring Karbonos, and bring the Maktas HaShekel, B'Rtzoin Hashem, Mamish today. Before Shalema to Moshe Zelik ben Rezel, before Shalema Liba Malka Bas Chaya Braina, for Shalema Yosef Sholem ben Shoshana Menucha, for Shalema David ben Margalit, Besok Shacholi Yisrael, and Kol Choli HaKorona, for Snerishu, for Saguf, Hashtabak, Alois Van Krib, and Omar Main. Everybody, please take care of your health, your safety. Again, last Be'er HaGoylech Hashem Mishpat, it's a mitzvah, mamish. It's avodas Hashem to keep a healthy body. With a healthy body, we can do so many wonderful things. With good teeth, we can bite the matzah. With healthy hands, we can put on tefillin and shake a lulav. We can kiss a mezuzah. With healthy bodies, we can do the mitzvahs. With chas v'shalom, not healthy bodies, we become reduced in our ability to do mitzvahs. So we keep ourselves healthy, so we can do the mitzvahs, so we can do the Gilui HaYichud, so we can dance and smile to greet Mashiach Tzidkenu today, Mamish, B'Ratzon Hashem. Everybody have a wonderful day. Scheduled tomorrow, Yom Revi, Wednesday, there's no shir. We will meet again in Miyat Hashem on Thursday at 9:30. Zai Gesund. Everybody have a wonderful, good, simchatik day.